I think we will. Did you have anything you wanted to, any gaps in the Palestine 101 you want to kind of fill in?
I'm sure that, what we needed was somebody who needed the 101 to be in the audience with us.
Yeah, so
you've got a master's, not quite a PhD.
I've never been accused of having a master's before. I'm not sure how to feel about that. Frankly, I left school in year 10, so I'm quite proud of my lack of education.
If my father was here, he would have spat out whatever he had in his mouth, because he often said, I was a doctor of nothing, a professor of bullshit. So, saying I had a PhD, he would have a good laugh.
Yeah, right. I think what we'll do, we're going to, I think in the process of our next discussion and the video I've got to play for you, I think we're going to probably, the readers are going to learn a bit more, fill in more of those gaps, because one of the issues that keeps coming up in this, in my experience, in terms of barriers for Australians to get involved in the discussion and to understand or get a basic grasp of what's going on, is this great Australian objection to, well, Hamas is a terrorist organisation, so what is Israel supposed to do? And Australians seem to have fallen on the final position of, well, they're a bit like ISIS. It must be like ISIS. And ISIS was bad, therefore Hamas is bad, therefore Israel is justified in doing what it's doing. Now, I know you've had your battles in the media, and we're about to watch a little mash-up clip of some of those battles. Maybe we'll do that. And
I hope you got some of my good stuff in there too.
I have. Look, actually, what I'll do, I've edited out most of your responses because it's not there to capture.
Oh, okay,
you handled yourself very well. It's there to capture the banality of the Australian journalist who, or journalists, it's more than one, who are trying to get you and others to say what they want to say. And so I'll play you the clip, and then I'm very interested in A, your response to the clip, and B, we'll have a bit of a chat about why this is such a problem. And I'll preface this by saying it's not just, as you'll see from the clip, it's not just Australia. This is it happens in Britain as well. Let's just have a look at the clip and come back and have a chat about it.
Isn't Hamas the problem here?
I just want to ask you a question. So last we left it, you did refuse to condemn Hamas murdering Israelis on October 7th, and it seems as if nothing has changed.
Last night, you wanted people to condemn what happened last night in your belief that it was an Israeli airstrike, and you were ferocious in demanding that repeatedly. Yes, will you now take the opportunity to condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th? I only ask you one more time.
But again, I'll ask you this again, though. Isn't Hamas the overall problem here?
You say one of the reasons for the atrocities that occurred in Israel on Saturday is the oppression of Palestinian people. Do you separate Hamas from Palestine?
But Australia views Hamas as a terrorist organisation. This is just getting back to this core here, Nasser. So how can you not come out and condemn them?
No, I think it's a question that doesn't really make sense, because...
Well, Hamas is a terrorist organisation. That's how we identify them there. And there are innocent Palestinians, absolutely, that have suffered, as have there been innocent Israelis that have suffered. But Hamas is a terrorist organisation.
But what about the Jews forced out of their land in Israel for what's been thousands of years?
The call is for a ceasefire, but there's not a call very often for all of the hostages to be released. Is that a demand that you think needs to be met before that can be considered?
Patricia, I think we need to go back to the reality that this is not a 35-day-old conflict.
Why won't you condemn that?
Can't you accept Hamas's responsibility leading up to this? That's all I'm asking you. Can you accept that? Will you condemn the terrorist organisation?
Of October.
I'm interested in playing whataboutry with you. I'm simply asking,
I'm
simply asking you, do you unreservedly condemn the slaughter of 260 innocent people?
But Nasser, the point is that Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and you've come on this show today and you're not prepared to condemn them.
Do you believe that 1,500 people were slaughtered, including 260 people at a music festival? You're a musician. And secondly, do you condemn the people who did it? They're not difficult
Piers,
questions.
I would like...
Nasser, again, I'm asking you, I'm talking about a terrorist organisation here. Are you going to come out and are you going to condemn the terrorist organisation? It's very, but it's a simple question, Nasser.
Did you ask Ms. Searle at no point?
Do you condemn 9/11?
That's such a ridiculous
It's a yes or no.
This
It's
is
yes
an
or no.
interrogation of...
You want my opinion?
Yes.
Condemning Hamas or condemning Israel?
Yes.
Completely useless. Completely useless.
Why?
I condemn Hamas, you condemn Israel, interview is over. What happened? Nothing. It is just checkpoint, like morality checkpoints.
I left in Bussum at the end there. I'll play some of the other clips for. I'll edit them into the video later because I thought you handled yourself exceptionally well. You were. I would have been jumping down the throats of these journalists, or yelling at them, or swearing at them, or you looked incredulous sometimes. Whereas particularly that Sky News interviewer, who's just a parody of herself. What's your response to that? I mean, that's a tiny sample of the bullshit that's gone on, and really, if you wanted a question to go with that, it won't be will you now condemn Hamas? The question would be, why do you think Australian media do that? Why do they need to reduce this to good guy, bad guy, and you can't participate in the discussion unless you preface it with a condemnation of Hamas? Why are we so backward?
I think there's two things we need to run parallel to it, Chris. Number one, you're a reporter. New Matilda is news. These are entertainment platforms that need to sensationalize stuff to get you to pay attention until the next ad.
Yeah, we're definitely not entertaining.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, I reckon it's
that's true.
We might get more than just mum watching. Right? Yeah. So understanding what that media or mainstream media's job is. Mainstream media's job is to deliver a dividend to shareholders. It's not to tell truth. It's not to inform. It's not to do anything other than sell advertising. Now, what works is, screamy, shouty, sensational. That's what that space lives in. But as an advocate, I'm trying to speak to a middle Australia that is watching that stuff. And so you've got to put myself in that space to be interrogated, because they're not interviews, they're interrogations. I mean, if the people that need to be interrogated are the Israeli generals and the Israeli spokespeople that come out. I mean, Mark Regev is an Australian. He's a spokesperson for that war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu. I think Piers Morgan said to him, you got hundreds of Palestinians stripped to their underwear in the middle of Gaza. He goes, it's pretty hot. I don't know where you are. It's not as hot as where it is. It's winter.
Yeah.
It's winter.
It's freezing.
So nobody's interrogating that bloke and asking him to condemn anything, condemning the 75 years of oppression that my people have faced, condemning the fact that for 17 years, the daily calorific intake required of food was calculated, and only that amount of food that wouldn't cause mass starvation was allowed in. And if you worked out that was 500 trucks a day, and you said now we're into day 70, 69 or 70 of since October 7, but that's 35,000 trucks. And by estimations, we're around 2,000 or 3,000 trucks have only been let in instead of 70,000 trucks. And 70,000 trucks if Gaza was normal and hadn't had the tonnage of munitions that equals more than 2 Hiroshimas, more than 2 Hiroshimas, nuclear weapons dropped on Gaza, that more than 20,000 people have been killed. There's up to 10,000 buried under rubble, 40,000 injured. Now, 40,000. Victoria has something like 10,000 hospital beds, right? So Victoria, which is a first world country, first world economy with a fully functioning hospital system, 40,000 injured people. That would collapse our health system that's fully functioning in the first world, let alone a developing country, that's had 2 nuclear bombs dropped on it.
Well,
condemn Hamas as if, and this is the disaster thing that says that, well, what they're trying to do is get from Australia's most visible Palestinian advocate acquiescence or manufacturing consent or giving license to the Australian government's willingness to, Israel's got a right to defend itself, because if Nasser condemns Hamas, it's okay. Number one. Number two, as if October 7 is the start date, as if on October 6 it didn't matter. And in that interview with Danica on the Sky News thing, there was a portion of it where I said, there's only one reason I'm on this show. She goes, yeah, because of Hamas. I said, that's got nothing to do with Hamas. I've sent you 10 press releases, 1 per month, since the 1st of January. It's October. You've had 10 press releases from my organization asking to come on to talk about apartheid, Israel's control and dominance of every Palestinian's life, on the siege, on the extermination of Palestinians within the West Bank, on illegal settlements, on the 250 Palestinians that have been killed from the 1st of January to the 6th of October. But you don't care about any of them. You only care now because some Israelis died. Yeah. And the sad thing is, you won't even give me the chance to mourn with them. I was interviewed by a woman, I can't remember whether it was ABC or the Project or something, and I was asked, now Nasser, do you understand why Australians would empathise with the victims of Hamas? And I went, of course I do. I'm a human being, but I'm also Australian. Are you including me in those Australians? Or is it because I look like them you think I don't care? As robbed of my humanity, yeah? And that comes back to Australia's first impulse as a settler colony. And when Benjamin Netanyahu last came to Australia, he was met by Malcolm Turnbull at the time, and they couldn't shake hands hard enough and fast enough, and they were so excited. And Malcolm Turnbull went, Australia, like Israel, we're like-minded countries, we're, vibrant democracies. No, you're like-minded countries, all right, because you're both settler colonies built on the destruction of an indigenous people and their continued oppression, and you are racist. You are like-minded, all right. It's got nothing to do with all the liberal democracy crap you talk about. And so we're part of the ticket to get on that ride is I've got to condemn Hamas. Well, I'm not going to condemn Hamas, which is not to say I accept what Hamas did. It's never okay to kill people. Every life is precious. But to tell people they don't have a right to resist an occupation, they don't have a right to fight against daily humiliation, that they don't have a right to fight for self-determination, is absurd. The Palestinian people are under occupation, and international law demands that the occupier look after the occupied. Israel cannot be at war with Hamas. Hamas is not a country. Hamas is a people, an ideology under occupation. Israel is breaking international law every single day. Now, when we talk about, on the Q&A, I endeavour to make the point, aside from Israel being an apartheid state, a brutal, racist apartheid regime with 2 sets of laws for 2 people and elevating one person and oppressing another based on solely on their religion, is that tomorrow needs to look like what theoretically we dream about Australia being, which is that irrespective of your religion, we can go to the footy together. Yeah, that footy is our religion. There's a separation of church and state. And that we can all live together, and there needs to be that a one-state solution, a Palestine that's free from the river to the sea for everyone, not for half the people. And that's what tomorrow needs to look like. But that Israel, as it operates today, that has to be dismantled. Yeah, and come back to Australia and have a look at what's happened in Australia since October 7. And that immediate knee-jerk feeling by, a reporter to say to me, do you understand why Australians, as if I'm not Australian? Because only hours earlier, every leader went, we've got to light up our buildings in blue and white in empathy with the victims of Hamas. as if every Palestinian victim or anybody that empathized with Palestinians or any Australian Palestinians should never have felt like anybody might empathize with them. So the buildings were lit up, and our premier of our most populous state, where you live, Premier Minns, went, Australian Jews, stay home. We can't protect you. We're not sure you're going to be safe. Backed by his commissioner of police, a whole bunch of ribbons and medals,
Yeah.
How many countries, perhaps he even had a sword by his side, who knows, said, Jews stay at home, fed into the most nasty stereotype that Australian Palestinians and their supporters are marauding, bloodthirsty jihadis, and that we would immediately set upon these Australian Jews. Instead of saying, today we're going to light it up blue and white, tomorrow we're going to go red, green, white and black, or doing both and honouring all peoples of all backgrounds, or not doing either, they elevated one population and diminished another and excluded us. So we're now violent. The next day, our alternative Prime Minister, in the first instance, when our Foreign Minister Penny Wong said we'd urge Israel to show some restraint, because she knew what they were going to do. She knew, like we knew 70 days ago, that what Israel's going to do. Because self-defense for Israel looks like not just punching a guy back because they punch you. Self-defense for Israel is tearing shit up, as we've seen. That the alternative Prime Minister went, she's got to get sacked. What sort of bloke are you, Elbow? What sort of Prime Minister are you that you're going to allow your Foreign Minister to say restraint, as if restraint's a bad word? And then next up, he said, anyone marching under that Hamas flag, the Palestinian flag, like we're a country, we're a people, we're like the world accepts we're a human, we're a race. That the Palestinian flag became a Hamas flag. And next he went, we should be deported. We don't belong.
Yeah.
Fast forward to last week, Simon Birmingham, our alternative foreign minister, took a cross-party delegation to Israel. Josh Burns, Amanda from Higgins, a Labor MP, and a couple of liberals, and they went, to visit Israel, to show solidarity with the Israelis and to visit families of hostages. No Palestinian hostages, not the 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza aren't hostages, not the Palestinian prisoners in administrative detention, not all the political Palestinian prisoners, no families of any of the Palestinians killed in Jenin last week. On top of all that, Simon Birmingham took this solidarity trip, and it was paid for by AJAC, the Australia-Israel Jewish Affairs Council. Mark Liebler, one of the organisations, that people like Mark Liebler lead. Israel lobby money paid for half a dozen of our federal parliamentarians to go to Israel to show solidarity with Israel. And then they want me to condemn Hamas. All that shit's going on. You cannot be serious.
Yeah. It's quite shameful when you spell it out the way you've spelled it out.
Imagine being our alternative foreign minister and taking Israel lobby money for a solidarity trip. I get the travel reporter, this resort was fantastic. I flew here via Etihad and the seat width was 26 inches. And at the byline, she goes, I flew there via, Etihad, P.S. Etihad, give us some money for this podcast. Etihad, and I stayed at, whatever Bali luxury resorts. She tells you, so there's a conflict of interest. You're our foreign minister. How the hell are you taking Israel lobby money to fly to Israel?
Yeah.
I'll condemn that, Chris. I'll condemn that.
Yeah. What were you thinking when you're sitting there with, particularly the Sky News one? Because as a journalist, I'm kind of fascinated by that kind of conduct, although I see that conduct all the time. I mean, my industry has probably got more psychopaths per square feet than any other industry, even more than politics. What are you thinking when you're sitting there? You obviously are familiar with the game. The game is I want clicks. I will get clicks if I can get this Palestinian man to not condemn Hamas. That's the game.
I actually, one time asked myself, so that interview went 14 or 15 minutes. And it felt like, and I don't know, but it felt like she went, do you condemn Hamas? I spent a minute talking, and then she went, condemn Hamas, 1 minute talking, condemn Hamas, 1 minute talking.
That's exactly how it went. I can tell you, I've cut it out.
Okay. Well, I haven't watched it again. But, you're absolutely right. That shit works on YouTube. So I imagine that video on their YouTube channels had, tens of thousands of likes and looks at and shares, and the comments will be amazing. Like, go back to where you came from, as if that's not what we're trying to do. I mean, I had a guy at a rally say, why don't you go back to where you come from? And that's what this rally's about. Join us. And
you mean like, Melbourne or Palestine?
Free Palestine. He goes, why'd you go back to where you came from? I went, we're trying.
We'd love to. Yeah.
We're trying. Join us. We might get there quicker. And he was like, what just happened then?
We've apparently both got an interest in you going back to where you came from. He wants you out because he's a racist, and you're happy to go back to Palestine.
Well, look, I'm pretty Australian now. I want the choice, and the reality as a refugee, and this is something I explained to a Labor MP recently when he was talking about the right of return and what that meant for Israel as a Jewish state. And I said, look, I don't care about Israel as a Jewish state, but I mean, just I want you to imagine what it's like for a pregnant woman, and her husband is fighting against the occupation, and he died fighting the occupation. And because when somebody takes your house, Chris, you're going to try and fight that. And this guy died fighting the occupation, and she's pregnant, and she's given birth to a son, and she names her son after her husband, her late husband. The kid's never going to meet the father. And that kid, wants to go home, Chris, and dreams about, visiting the village his dad grew up in and where he was conceived. And no one will tell that kid he can't go back to Crimea. No one telling that kid he can't go back to the Ukraine. But they want to tell me I can't go back.
Yeah. It's really, I think I heard, it was either Ilan Pape or might have been Norman Finkelstein, or it may have even been Gabor Mate, but talking about the real evidence, the smoking gun, if you like, of apartheid is the fact that Palestinians don't have a right of return.
So any Jew anywhere in the world, we're talking about you marrying a French Jew and both of you going up in a settlement built on our ancestral lands, olive trees that got bulldozed. You can go back, but we can't. Like in our village, there are 6 gravestones that are legible for my ancestors and a 7th that I'm claiming. But I'm not allowed back. And we talk about right of return. I'm an Aussie, but my kids might want to go back, and my grandkids. That's a right. But then, part of everything that we talk about, and I'm so proud of the movement as it exists today, is about our hope for a better world, not just for Palestinians, but a better world for all of us. Where it doesn't matter. As Martin Luther King, judge me by the content of my character, not the color of my skin. And that's true for all of us, black, brown, yellow, Jew, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, he, she, they, whatever. We're all human beings on a precious earth that we live together. And surely if we're aspiring to that as a goal, any sort of supremacism, whatever it might be, Hindu supremacism in India or Buddhist
supremacism in Myanmar is horrific.
Myanmar. Jewish supremacism as Zionism in Palestine. We've got to work for a world and a system that doesn't allow that becomes unacceptable, and that the world as a community works towards abolishing it.
It was a few minutes back, but I wanted to add that with that video, the woman who was interviewing Randa That is Erin Molan, who is the daughter of Jim Molan, the butcher of Fallujah. And for readers who don't know what that means or who that is, just Google Jim Molan, butcher of Fallujah. He was an Australian general in charge of US and Australian forces, the kind of multi-forces in Iraq, in the second war in Iraq. Anyway, we're allowed to call him the butcher of Fallujah now, A, because we're protected by parliamentary privilege. Just thank God for Adam Bandt, he stood up and said that in Parliament. And B, Jim Molan has passed away, died, I think, earlier this year from cancer. I'm going to play you another. You mentioned Mark Regev a short time ago. I'm going to play you. I played this clip to Peter Slezak in the first of this series, and I want to play it to you and get your take on this. I'm not trying to provoke.
He's an Aussie too, Mark Regev.
He's from Melbourne.
He's the least Aussie bloke I've ever met.
Yeah, he's got a. I've still got to defend New Matilda in the court of law and on defamation, so I'll stop short of what I think of Mark Regev. But I'll play you this video, and I'm interested in your take on it.
Hamas, until now, we're destroying their military machine, and with that, we're eroding their control. But up until now, they've been in control of the Gaza Strip. And as a result, they control all the images coming out of Gaza. Have you seen one picture of a single dead Hamas terrorist in the fighting in Gaza? Not one. Is that by accident, or is that because Hamas can control the information?
You asked me a question and you
Gaza.
said you would be brief. I haven't, you're right, but I have seen lots of children with my own lying eyes being pulled from the rubble.
Because they're the pictures Hamas wants you to see. Exactly my point,
they're dead,
they're the pictures
also
Hamas wants.
But they're also people that your government has killed. You accept that, right? You've killed children, or do you deny that?
No, I do not. I do not. First of all, you don't know how those people died, those children.
Oh, wow.
First of all.
Yeah, that's Mark Regev. You may have seen that clip before.
I have seen that clip, but I mean, I've seen so many of his clips, and
yeah, so have I. I almost can't watch them now, but I have to for work. And
you have to think. I don't know how this bloke sleeps, and he must, really scrub himself. He must feel so dirty. I mean,
yeah.
You don't know how those kids died. I mean, some of the, I don't know how. Look, if anybody,
there were over 5,000 dead children when he made those comments, by the way.
And every one of them with an Israeli issued birth registry number. I don't know how many, how close to, depending on how close to Palestine and Palestinians you are, and to what WhatsApp groups you might be in, and to what Instagram or Facebook people you follow, but some of the images are so haunting.
Oh, yeah.
You can't, there's groups that I've been added to as in WhatsApp that you can't exit because you're almost ashamed to, like there's a shame to exiting them, but I don't go in there.
Yeah.
And I don't go in there because, there's people, Australian Palestinians from Gaza who've got family there, and they're sharing, and we talked before about, you were saying about Hamas, and, one of the things that I remember I said it on Q&A, Palestinians are killed, and then we're dead, and then they blame us for being dead.
Slandered, yeah.
And then after being blamed for it was our fault that we died. We had to drop that those bombs on that refugee camp to kill the Hamas guy that was using 600 people as as human shields, and then we're smeared, because we're all terrorists, and that 100 years or more of Orientalism and dehumanization of the Arab male. So that now we talk about deaths, women and children. We don't talk about innocent men as if Palestinian men aren't innocent. Like anybody that's above 18 is Hamas. So women and children, there's that women and children, but we don't talk about men, women and children. Palestinian men are innocent too. not every Palestinian male is in fact Hamas. So the images you see, when somebody like Mark Regev says, you don't know how they died. If you've seen any of the images, you know how they died. And I was on a show on Channel 9. It was a morning show. And the woman that was interviewing me said they just bombed an ambulance outside of a hospital. And they just run the story before that. And she said, whatever. And she said, and and I said, 100 people have died. Something like that. Who knows what the number is. 100 people have died in that bombing. And she said, to be fair, Israel says there was a Hamas guy inside the ambulance.
Oh, well, okay.
And I said, it's an ambulance next to a hospital. 100 people died. Yesterday or the day before, earlier that week, whatever, it was when they dropped all those bombs on that refugee camp and killed like 500 people to get one guy. And I said to her, have you ever asked one of the Israeli guys if there were 500 Jews in a building and there was one Hamas guy underneath those Jews, would they drop the same ordinance to get that Hamas guy? And we know the answer, they wouldn't.
Of course not.
It's because Palestinian lives just don't matter to Israeli generals.
No.
Palestinian lives don't matter to Western media. Palestinian lives don't matter to Western governments. Israel exists in the way that it does, and it does what it does with the impunity that the West gives it. And that impunity looks like the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel's got a right to defend itself. And all those catchphrases that Israel made the desert bloom. Israel didn't make the desert bloom. The desert was blooming before they got there. Israel became a state and was able to function so quickly because in Arabic we say, "Akhaduha mafrushi." They took it furnished. They took it furnished. When they expelled Palestinians from villages, the bank that was there, they didn't let people take the cash. They threw them out. The cash became theirs. They moved into houses that were fully furnished. They took over fields that had crops ready to be harvested. They took over farms that had cows ready to be milked. They took over orange groves with oranges ready to be harvested. Akhaduha mafrushi, they took it fully furnished. But we've been dehumanized to that point, and that we don't matter. And the impunity that the West gives Israel allows it to do that. And so when I said to this woman, just check yourself, that's an ambulance. It's an ambulance. And in another interview I was speaking to, and she was saying something, I said, you're a mother. 50,000 women were pregnant in Gaza on the 7th of October. 50,000, 5,500 were going to give birth in the next 4 weeks. That's 500 a day. They've run out of medicine. Women are now having cesareans without anesthetic. Now, I'm not an international lawyer, but if you tell me that that's not breaking some sort of international law, that the occupying power is not only not letting food or electricity or power, medicine in, but women are having cesareans without anesthetic. If that's not breaking international law, if that's not a war crime, the problem isn't Israel doing it. The problem is with the law. But more than that, it's the West allowing it to happen. And if you zoom out of the micro into the macro and have a look and go, the global South's watching. The whole of Africa is crying with Palestine. The whole of Asia is crying with Palestine. The whole of South America is crying for Palestine. And then you go the West, the 2/9 of the world that is the global North. Big chunks of that are crying.
Yeah, Europe. Very much so.
We've had hundreds of thousands of people. If you total the 9 demonstrations that we've had in Melbourne, there'd be over 1 million people have come out. That's the same people every week, but it's over 9 weeks. We're about to have that 9th one on Sunday. And every report comes out following Chris Minz's "Be careful, Australian Jews don't come out." Peaceful demonstrations. I got interviewed by Raf Epstein, on the ABC here in Melbourne, and there were 50,000 people at that rally. One guy had a poster of Hitler morphing into Netanyahu, and the interview was about, what he wanted to talk about was this anti-Semitic sign. I said it was 49,999 other people, Raph. You're worried about
apart from the fact that's not anti-Semitic.
On top of which, at that point, there were 5,000 kids
I would
there,
run
yeah?
that on New Matilda, yeah. I
There
would
were
run that
50
as a graphic on the front page. It's appropriate. I mean,
at that point, there were
ludicrous.
10,000 dead people, and you're talking about one sign, because, you know, we've got this exceptionalism that sits around the Holocaust and that suffering, and the Holocaust is 13 out of 10 evil. 13 out of 10 evil. But if you don't think Gaza today is a 7 or an 8, right?
I'd argue
and
it's
then you
higher
say
than
to yourself, I'm not going to say anything until it's a 9 or a 10 or an 11 or a 12. What sort of human being are you? And then you go back to that global south, and all they've been told is about international law and democracy and a rules-based order and the United Nations, and, you know, people have got to do what they've got to, you know, act in civilized ways. And when the Russia went into the Ukraine, sanctions, Magnitsky Act, seizing assets, you know, all sorts of stuff. Well, any wonder that, you know, half of French Africa has kicked out French forces, you know, in Gabon and so many. Is there any wonder that the global South's going, are you serious? Tomorrow, whenever tomorrow is, when China takes Taiwan, Gaza 23 is the new rule book. Ukraine was the rule book. This is what's going to happen if we do something wrong, you know, the sanctions. Make sure we get our cash right. We've got to have foreign, you know, that's what China's metrics would have been following Ukraine. But now following Gaza 23, they've gone, there's a new rule book. Write the new rule book. This is the new rule book. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. It is extraordinary, isn't it? You mentioned before generals, you know, the lives of Palestinians are worth less to Israeli generals. It's a perfect segue into another video I want to show you. This is an Israeli general who's the focus of the video, but I'll come back and explain it.
קהל אחינו הקטן והאהוב, הקטן מבין 5 המופלאים.
That's the Israeli general there, the big guy in the grey shirt. That guy with the sunglasses on.
That's his son, isn't it?
ואתה אמרת לי באחת משיחות הנפש שלנו שהייתי חסר לך מאוד, הרבה מאוד שנים.
And of course, for readers, that's Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, there with the grey hair. He's comforting the father who we just saw crying. I know you know who all that is, but for readers who are unaware, the general in the footage is a man called Gabi Eisenkot. He is a retired general of the Israeli Defence Force. He used to be the chief of staff of the Israeli Defence Force, so one of the most senior military men Israel's ever had. He's now a government minister with no portfolio in the Netanyahu government. He's also the architect of what's known as the Dahia Doctrine, which it was articulated by Gabi Eisenkot in 2008 when he was describing what he did, the forces he led did in Beirut in 2006. Israel attacked Lebanon and they bombed a neighborhood called Dahia in southern Beirut into oblivion. And that was the neighborhood that then and still to this day has the Borj al-Bereshna refugee camp, where some 50 to 75,000, depending on the time of year, refugees, predominantly Palestinian, but some Syrian, live and have lived for 50 plus years. Now, the footage, obviously, that we just saw is of a funeral, and it's the funeral of General Eisenkot's son, Gal, who was killed in Gaza last week. That footage is only from this week. Gal, his son, was killed on December 7 at the refugee camp you referenced earlier, Nasser, Jabalia refugee camp, where they killed, Jabalia, where they killed something like, I think, 450 something refugees in one bombing when they went after one commander. But they also, prior to that, killed 80 Palestinians in a single attack when they aerial bombed a school. And the irony, of course, is that what they're doing in Jabalia and Gaza and beyond is the Dahia doctrine that Gabby Eisenkot invented and articulated. And now, of course, Gabby Eisenkot is burying his son, who was killed carrying out the Dahia doctrine. I just wondered...
Probably actually worse than that. The Dahia doctrine didn't work. Like the whole concept behind the Dahia contract
is to break the will. That's right. You're right.
Well, I break the will, but make sure that the space is safe for their troops.
Mm.
The whole concept is you go so overwhelming, so devastating that nobody's left. Whoever's left is broken / surrenders. So you're making it really safe for your troops. Now, the humanitarian toll on that city is so overwhelming, but our troops are safe. Harry is the architect of it, designed it, and in fact, proved that it doesn't work.
No, and his son is now dead. It's obviously a war crime. I mean, it was described, it's been described that way countless times. There's no dispute that it's a war crime. I don't even know that Israel disputes that it's a war crime. It was described in 2011.
No, they're the most moral army in the world, Chris.
Of course they
are. You're an anti-Semite for suggesting anything other than that.
Yeah,
any
indeed.
free-thinking person who would say there's allegedly, we've got no evidence. There's one guy in a tunnel. I'm still waiting for them to, get all the tunnels and everything. But there's one guy in a tunnel under a refugee camp with 500 people on top of it. And the size of the crater, it looks like the MCG, what's left of Jabalia refugee camp. But they had to kill 450, 500 people to get this guy. It was so important to get this guy that these 500 people had to die to make that area safe for this general's son to come in and for his own son to actually die. I mean, the human catastrophe that we just have to continue spilling blood. Nobody ever bombed their way to peace. This is the absurdity of this shit. Whether America in Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam and Korea, you don't bomb your way to peace. You make peace with your enemy. You do a deal, whatever the deal might be.
I'll say they did in Hiroshima, but of course Japan was lurching towards peace anyway.
Look, depending on what you read and everything, Hiroshima and Nagasaki would have told the Russians,
it's two of the greatest war crimes ever committed.
Yeah, we got this stuff ready.
A single act. Richard Falk, who was the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Palestine, described General Eisenkot's Dahia doctrine as, quote, state terrorism. And that's why I played the video, and that's my question, because you've been grilled by journalists all up and down the eastern seaboard. Will you condemn Hamas they're a terrorist organisation? Will you condemn Hamas? But I'm interested in your take on that video, because I stumbled across that late one night, and I was actually genuinely very moved by his grief. I mean, his grief is obvious. It's not fake. He is burying his son. He's struggling to deal with the death of his son. But the irony and the Schadenfreude and it doesn't get any richer, I don't think. than that.
It doesn't.
It's tragic at so many levels, but
look, I mean, you can't be human and not see another human being's grief and not feel or empathize with it. Yeah, I mean, and certainly the older you get, and you know, you know, I've got a very full opinion of myself, Chris. But I remember when I held my son, you know, after his birth, and I went, there's simply nothing you wouldn't even contemplate not doing. And a friend of mine many years later told me he's got a child with some challenges, and he said, as a parent, you can only be as happy as your least happy child. Capacity for happiness, for joy, can only be as happy as your least happy child. And if your least happy child is really sad, that's where you live. You know? And your least happy child is, you know, self-harming, that's where you live. And if your least happy child, if you're burying a child, that's where you live.
And if you're digging your child out of rubble in a Gazan neighbourhood, which tens of thousands of men and women have had to do in the last 2 months. Why do you think Australia, I mean, you mentioned the images. I think I kind of hit my limit on the weekend, actually. The weekend just passed. There's a video doing the rounds on social media. It's 10 hours, 10-hour long video on Twitter. 10 hours of dead and dying Gazan children. I've been a journalist 30-something years. I've been to war zones. I've reported Aboriginal affairs for 20 years. I've never seen anything quite like it. And I think I probably hit my limit on the weekend where I just went, I can't. You know, it's hard to, you think, well, I shouldn't turn away, but I understand why people do, because it is just so obscene what is happening. But I'm not trying to, I just wonder how the Palestinian community is confronting this, and why you think the broader Australian community, you know, these images are everywhere. It's not like we can't access them, and it's not like Israelis in Israel can't access them. I just wonder if you've got a take on how this is not moving people more than we've been moved.
So I'm Australia's whitest Palestinian. Member of 2 private golf clubs, fully assimilated, you know, European sports cars, you know, have a thriving business, private school kids. My children learned to sail, Chris.
Yeah, right.
You know, we were members of a yacht squadron. You're not getting any whiter than members of a yacht squadron.
Tennis, maybe.
Hey?
Tennis, maybe, if you're a member of a tennis club.
We're members of tennis clubs too. We ticked every box, man. We ticked every box.
I'm just getting you a trophy. Here you go.
I in fact, I had one of my dearest and best friends' ex-father-in-law pick me up one day. We were playing golf, and he picked me up and he goes, "You know what? I know white blokes that are woggier than you. I'm not calling you Nasser anymore. I'm going to call you William."
William. Bill.
So understand that paradigm, how assimilated and how white we are. I've never, and I grew up in the whitest, you know, quote unquote, bit of Melbourne, Bayside Melbourne, Beaumaris, in a milk bar to refugee parents. You know, I went to school where people got picked up in a Mercedes or a BMW, and I caught the bus. I walked to catch a bus, to catch a train, to catch a bus, to walk the last bit. And, you know, I look back now and, you know, maybe there was shame or embarrassment when Mum would pick me up in the HQ Kingswood 3 on the tree, you know.
That's a great car.
She'd pick me up, and, you know, the kids would be like, "What are you doing on the weekend?" And I'd be like, "Working in a milk bar." And they were off to Portsea, down to the beach, or to Bulla to the snow. And sometimes I'd find out on Monday, Chris, that my best friend's birthday party was yesterday. And I'd ask, how come I didn't come? And the answer would be, well, Mum and Dad don't want the milk bar boy at our house.
Oh, wow.
So everybody was a Matthew, Paul, Peter, or a Luke, disciples, named after disciples, a Matthew, a John, Peter. And I was the only one that actually looked like a disciple.
Apparently Jesus, he looked...
Yeah, blonde hair and blue-eyed, like Matthew, Paul, Peter, Luke. And,
that's right.
So I grew up in that really very passive-aggressive white racist space that sometimes manifested itself violently. One time playing cricket, and the dad, was violent in kicking me off the team. Like, what are you doing? Get out of Georgia, you black son of a bitch. It was like being in Jim Crow's southern states. Growing up in that space, but finding a way to get to where I did, and at one point, I had 8 businesses in financial services, and we employed well over 100 people. 5 different offices, and some of the most wonderful messages I've received since October 7 have been from those staff that used to work for us before we sold all those businesses down before COVID. Understanding just how Australian I am. I've never felt ever that I didn't belong until October 6th. I've never not felt like Australia's my home. The past 2 months have been a roller coaster of emotions of anxiety, angst, distress, worry. Not for me. I mean, you've seen the attacks on me, Chris. I'm robust and I'm okay. But that after everything that my father went through, everything my father did for the country, he worked paid taxes, did everything he was supposed to do. After everything I've done to participate in and be a part of, that here we are at a time when we were needing to feel somewhere safe, that our adopted country, a country that gave my father refuge as a stateless person, that we're so othered. We're so othered that we don't belong, that our pain isn't equal, that, the interview, that interview, if anybody ever watches it, the woman's name was Danica, and it's her job to do it.
I'll put a link in the description.
I don't think she hates Palestinians or hates me. It's her job to get clicks, and that's how she gets paid, and that's how the station makes money. I mean, I understand how capitalism works and market economics, etc.
Sounds like the Nuremberg defense, but anyway.
That's violent. Those interviews are violent. Now I understand that, and I subject myself to it. I can deal with it. I've grown an ability to do it. But to provide cover and space for my community that doesn't have the support mechanisms I do, or are not as robust as I am, to be able to deal with that space, because I'm trying to talk to. There's 20 and 100 people are absolutely on my side. And 10 out of 100 people are absolutely on Benjamin Netanyahu's side. And I'm trying to talk to these 70 in here. Now, the easiest person for me to pick off is number 79. But I'm desperately working for number 49, who's slightly that side. Because when I get number 49 over here, the scales tip. Yeah? And I'd argue that our message of inclusion, our message of humanity, our message of everybody belonging equally is a far more attractive message than their message, which is we're better, it's ours, only we belong, and they're all evil and they just want to kill us. As if, and linking back to Lawrence of Arabia, when Lawrence said to the Arabs, fight against the Ottomans, and when we win, we'll give you a country. And he ended up giving everybody a country except for the Palestinians. You remember that Oprah show? The Palestinians fought against the Ottomans, who had occupied them for 400 years. The Ottomans were Muslim. No one accused us of being Islamophobes. No one accused us of being Islamophobes in 1917 when Lawrence got us to fight the Turks. Palestinians don't resist Israel's occupation of Palestine because they're Jewish. They could be Hindu, Christian, agnostic, or even Muslim. Palestinians would still fight the fact that they took our house. And not even happy with that, stand on our head and every now and again need to kick the shit out of us. It's the occupation, the lack of rights that we're fighting. The fact that Israelis are Jewish and they self-claim it as a Jewish state is secondary to the injustice, which is the fight against oppression and the denial of our self-determination. That's the fight. And, you know, one of my friends said, you know, he made the joke, he said, if Martians came and occupied us, we'd find a way to get to the red planet to fight back. Yeah. And so, you know, what really hurts is that nobody, or when I say nobody, here we are in the top 20. Number 79 gets it. Number 78 gets it. What hurts is that numbers 40 to numbers 60 don't, they go this way or that way as to whether we're ISIS or there's too many babies getting killed. ISIS, they're not actually going, Palestinians have a right to self-determination. There's an injustice that's happened here that's 75 years old, not 70 days old. You know, they're not seeing the actual root cause of this, which is a violent supremacist ideology that predicates its existence on exclusivity and the denial of the other. And if you understand, in fact, exactly what Israel is, a violent, settler, colonial, ethnocratic, racist state construct, and that to exist, it has to exist violently. And that's what this looks like. But what we're seeing in Gaza 23 is exactly what happened here 250 years ago. Exactly what happened in Aotearoa, New Zealand, or in North America, or in South America, or in Belgium, in the Congo, or in any of the Algeria, Tunisia by the French, or Libya by the Italians, in any of the colonial states. It's just the next level of weaponry. It used to be, you know, muskets versus bows and arrows, and then it was machine guns versus single shots, and then it was airplanes versus a machine gun, and now it's, you know, nuclear armed states against Kalashnikovs.
And white phosphorus.
And
dropped on civilian areas.
And so it hurts to no end that, you know, part of my job as an advocate is to try and find that space where I can speak to, and the easiest way for me to get to that space is go, kids, yeah, as if our women matter less or our men matter even less, when in fact we should be talking about the injustice. By the way, look how the injustice has manifested itself in the killing of our men, women, and children. And a huge chunk of that is because, you know, the Arab male is, you know, swarthy, hairy, spitter, terrorist, you know, every image you've ever seen in any Hollywood movie. You know, we're the bad guy. You know, we're just human beings. Like every one of these kids had a parent who dreamed their kid would be a poet or a doctor or an author or, you know, a musician. You know, they had hopes and dreams, and the parents had, you know, but, you know, if you're a Palestinian child, you're 18. When you were 2, that was the first Gaza war. When you were 5, there was another Gaza war. When you were 9, there was another Gaza war. When there was 12, you were another, and 15, 17, and now 18. You've lived through 6 of these wars. Never once have you had food stability. Never once have you had power stability. Never once have you been outside. Gaza is 40 kilometres long and in some parts only 5 kilometres wide. You've never been out of an area that fits inside Canberra twice, inside Melbourne 30 times. You've never been out. You weren't born when Hamas was elected. And yet you're dead or you're suffering because of that. And you know, for me to get to the space where I'm talking to numbers 40 to 60, trying to get them to my side, my entry point is them feeling concerned about dead kids. And, you know, I've got to use any angle I can, Chris.
Yeah.
But the injustice needs to be sitting at the front. And the consequence of the injustice is the death of our innocent men, the death of our innocent women, and the death of our innocent children. All of them precious. As are the Jewish lives that were lost, as are the Jewish hostages, as are the Palestinian hostages, the prisoners of war, they're all. And the language I'm trying to talk to those 60 to 40 is that if we can close our eyes and imagine that place tomorrow where it doesn't matter how you celebrate God. On Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we can play marbles together. On Friday, pray your way. On Saturday, pray your way. On Sunday, pray your way. On Monday, let's just play marbles together. And also, if you don't want to pray at all, that's okay too.
That's a beautiful way to wrap this up. I had one final question for you, and I asked this of Peter Slezak as well, and it'll probably be the final question of all in the whole series. But if you had some advice for young Palestinian Australians or young Arab Australians or just young other Australians who want to get more involved in this issue and want to not just sit by and look at photos of dead Palestinian children on social media, how can they get more involved?
Well, it's you know, that's a really good way to finish, Chris. There's never been an easier way to be involved. Back in the old days, we used to have to borrow. I remember my very first proper school project. My dad drove me to the library with a whole bunch of 5-cent pieces because I had to photocopy Encyclopedia Britannica, you know, the pages.
Yeah.
The I can't remember, was it Persian Empire or something? I had to do a timeline on the Persian Empire.
We had the Funk and Wagnalls at home, so yeah.
Well, we could never afford
a rich family.
We couldn't afford the Funk and Wagnalls, man.
We were a middle class rich one. Yeah.
You were rich, huh?
Yeah, very rich.
In fact, have a look. You know, just interestingly, you know, 40 years later, I was, I don't know, Facebook Marketplace. It was a full set of Encyclopedia Britannica.
Oh, really?
And I like tagged the guy, you know, and drove the next day and got them. I brought them home. And my kids were about 10, 8, and 6. And like, what's this, Dad? I said, this was my dad's dream. I can't believe we've got an Encyclopedia Britannica here. And I've pulled it out and I've gone, before you used to use Google, we used to get this stuff and go, you know, P for Palestine, and you open it up and look at all the stuff about Palestine.
Yeah. People used to have to take out loans to afford them. You couldn't buy a set. They were thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah.
Thousands of dollars. Well, they're $200 today. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
So I think we opened them like 3 times, and for a decade they sat on our bookshelf. They're now in storage, but anyway, because I can't throw them away. But today, like never before, somebody can get connected and can find out. And you know, I'd suggested them to go to the Australia Palestine Advocacy Network's website, apan.org.au, for all of our resources. But there are so many places for them to get that information. The most important thing I would say to them, whether they're Palestinian, whether they're Arab, whether they're Muslim, or whether they're just Australian, not that we're all not just Australian, the important thing for them to understand, however they get to Palestine, to understand that Palestine is a social justice issue, it's a rights issue, that opening that book on Palestine is also opening that book on everything else. It's opening that book on what's happening here in this colony. It's opening that book on what's happening in West Papua. It's opening that book and understanding what's happening in Kashmir. what happened in Turtle Island, North America, and Aotearoa. It's what's happening in every bit of injustice all over the world, whether it's climate, whether it's food insecurity, whether it's housing affordability, that all of these things are connected in one way or another. The thing that I speak about as often as I get is understanding that Palestine is at the center of so many struggles because A, it's very visible, B, it's winnable. Palestine's winnable. And it's winnable because as a settler colony, Israel didn't succeed. It settled the land, but it wasn't able to colonize the people. It didn't, quote unquote, extinguish us. Not that the indigenous people here weren't extinguished, not that the indigenous people in Aotearoa were extinguished, etc., but didn't get us to a point where we weren't able to resist. I mean, imagine this joint if 50% of the population or 51% of the population were Lydia Thorpe or Gary Foley or
holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what
quite exciting.
Is. Correct. Yeah. I mean, we're excited about that. That's what Palestine is. 51 or 52% of that land is Palestinian and fiercely Palestinian. That understanding that is a nexus for so many struggles because it is inspiring. Palestinian steadfastness is so inspiring. That Palestinian resistance to occupation is inspiring. And resistance takes so many different forms. From not leaving is resistance. Palestinians are amongst the most educated people on earth. They could be employed anywhere on earth, but they don't leave. There's another saying we say, "Hinni bidamru wa nahna minkhallaf." They destroy and we give life. Women give birth, give life. Palestine, the Palestinians are unbreakable and unconquered, and they are a testament to indigenous people's connection to land. And I often talk in that space when I'm talking to indigenous crew blackfellas here. Indigeneity is when the land owns you, not when you own the land. And that's the difference between Zionism as a settler colony, where you've got to bomb your way to ownership, over what Palestinians are doing, which is ready to die to live. And that's the big difference. So I'd say to any Australian, whatever their makeup or ancestry, etc., might be, is to understand that Palestine is the litmus test. It's easy to be good in a queer space. It's easy to be good on climate. It's easy to be good on so many different progressive spaces. But if you're not good on Palestine, and that's the measure of other activists, there are many people who are progressive except for Palestine. We call them PEPers, P-E-P, progressive except for Palestine. But if people are not progressive on Palestine, they're not progressive. But Palestine is a litmus test. So use Palestine, understand Palestine is part of a global struggle. And that global struggle is for a better world for all of us.
Beautiful. Thanks, Nasser. I really appreciate your time. It's been a very long chat, but very worth it. I think you'll make it much easier for people to find their way into this. I can say from personal experience, it's not complicated. It's not as complicated as people think anyway. It's a story that's been replicated, as you say, it's been replicated all around the world. And they're still trying to do it. They're still trying to get away with it. So,
well, if the Zionists hadn't taken over Palestine, I would have been half Jewish and half Muslim.
Yeah.
And then I ended up, in Australia, and Dad married a Christian.
It's kind of like a super Jesus, really, half Muslim, half Jewish.
And so like my dad's grandchildren are Muslim, Christian, and sort of secular atheist. So he's got three of each.
Yeah. We have to do this again. The series will go on, and hopefully we can catch up again and in the not too distant future and talk about ceasefire.
We've got to talk a post and what tomorrow looks like and how we get to tomorrow, but we also got to talk about your trips to Palestine and your experience. Next time I'll interview you.
Oh, look, I'd love to talk about it. It was a real eye-opener for me. I felt I felt very drawn to Palestine and to Palestinian people. Very welcome, as everybody says when they go to Palestine. Arabs are the most welcoming people on the planet, from what I can tell. But just there was so much familiarity because of my own personal history, but also my work history with Aboriginal affairs. It just felt ridiculously similar, and in a way that's really encouraging, and in a way that's quite tragic. So, yeah, I'd love to chat about it sometime. You've got a podcast, so we'll do that.
Absolutely.
All right.
Look forward to it.
Thanks once again for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Good on you, mate.
Thanks.
Thank you.